Shabbat Shalom. In 1945 and 1946, the world watched as Nazi officials were brought to trial. Time and time again, these men who had committed atrocities claimed that they should not be held accountable for their crimes because they were only following orders given by a superior. In April 1946, Field Marshal Wilhelm Keitel was brought before the tribunal. Speaking in his defense, he repeatedly argued that he was following orders and his personal opinions were not taken into account. When pressed, he finally admitted to knowing that what he was doing was wrong and doing it anyway. According to my inner convictions, I did not consider it right, but after it had been given, I did not oppose it or take a stand against it in any way. Despite his assertion that his culpability should be limited as he was only following someone else's orders, he was convicted and sentenced to death by hanging. This week, we witnessed an immoral and illegal being handed down in the Torah. But unlike the German officers, the women who received it defy that order. This week, we begin the book of Exodus. We have finally grown from being the family of Jacob to becoming Am Yisrael, the people or the nation of Israel. But it is our growth that creates a perceived threat to Pharaoh. The text tells us that a new Pharaoh arose in Egypt, one who did not remember that it was Joseph who had saved the Egyptians and ultimately the world from famine. He simply sees us as a threat. As we grow larger and stronger, he becomes afraid that we might choose to side with his enemies in battle. So his solution is to oppress us and enslave us. Yet we continue to grow. His next idea is more evil and depraved. He tells the midwives to kill any male child born to a Hebrew woman. This command is blatantly immoral. And yet Pharaoh has the status of God in Egypt. Who would dare defy him? He expects that his order will be carried out according to his will. But two of the midwives, Shiphrah and Puah, two of the few women named in our Bible, they defy this order. And the text tells us that they do so because they feared God. The text never tells us whether the women themselves were Israelites, only that they were midwives to the Hebrew women. And yet the text tells us that they refused Pharaoh's orders because they feared Adonai. For this brave act of defying Pharaoh and saving the Israelite nation, the text tells us that God dealt well with them and established households for each of them. But the parashah doesn't stop there. This week, we see more acts of brave defiance. After the Pharaoh sees that his decree to kill the male children is not succeeding, he instead decrees that all Hebrew male babies should be thrown into the Nile. But one woman, Yocheved, she defies that order. She hides her baby for 3 months and then lovingly places him in a lined basket in the Nile. In doing so, she is relying on the kindness and bravery of an Egyptian woman, because who else would be able to find and take care of her precious baby? The text then tells us, the daughter of Pharaoh came down to bathe in the Nile while her maidens walked along the Nile. She spied the basket among the reeds and sent her slave girl to fetch it. When she opened it, she saw that it was a child, a boy, crying. She took pity on it and said, "This must be a Hebrew child." Knowing that this was a Hebrew child, because who else would have placed their baby in a basket in the river, she too defies her father and gives the baby shelter. Even his name is an act of defiance, Moshe, to be drawn from the water. Having been rescued by Pharaoh's daughter, Moses grows up in Pharaoh's palace, being afforded all the privileges and luxuries of that position. He could easily have turned a blind eye to the slaves and lived his life in comfort. Yet he too defies Pharaoh's cruelty when he stands up for Israelites being attacked by the Egyptian taskmasters. although in his act of defiance, he himself commits an act of violence and thus flees his home. Judaism is clear. We are not to acquiesce to illegal or immoral commands, regardless of where they come from. This is true even when the immorality comes from God, God's self. Abraham and Moses both challenge God when God threatens to kill innocents along with the guilty. Abraham unsuccessfully argues with God when God plans to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah. Moses successfully argues with God when God plans multiple times to destroy us when we are stubborn and insolent in the desert. If the Torah preserves examples of humans standing up to God, surely we are supposed to stand up to other humans when illegal commands are handed down. Jewish law and Jewish values are clear. Not only are we commanded to not follow immoral commands, but we are commanded to do so even at our own risk. It is well known that Judaism places the preservation of life above almost everything else. When a life is in danger, yours or anyone else's, you are allowed to transgress almost any commandment. You can break Shabbat, you can steal, you can do most things, but there are 3 things that you cannot do, even under threat of violence or death. These are the 3 acts which are considered to be so immoral that we are not allowed to engage in them, even under threat: idolatry, adultery, and murder. In other words, if a gun is being held to your head and you are given the choice to kill another or allow yourself to be killed, we are commanded to allow ourselves to be killed. When I set out to write this sermon, my initial thought was that it was going to be about civil disobedience. But in researching the term, it's actually civil disobedience has to meet 3 standards. It has to be public, it has to be nonviolent, and it has to be towards the pursuit of greater moral justice. Shifra and Pua quietly defy Pharaoh's orders, and when called to account for their actions, they lie to continue preserving life. Moses' attempt to protect the Israelites results in violence. And the men and women who risked their own lives to shelter Jews in Nazi Germany certainly did not publicize their defiance. If their acts of bravery had become known, they, along with anyone they were trying to save, would have been immediately killed. Thus, while these actions may not technically fit the bill for civil disobedience, they are no less brave, heroic, and honorable. Defying power, whether publicly or discreetly, can be scary. In doing so, we open ourselves up to ridicule, harassment, retribution, or even the threat of violence. But both the secular and religious law is clear. We are commanded to refuse orders that are illegal or immoral. This was codified in 1946 during the Nuremberg trials when the argument, "I was just following orders," was not accepted as a defense. Nuremberg Principle 4 states, "The fact that a person acted pursuant to the order of his government or of a superior does not relieve him from the responsibility under international law, provided a moral choice was in fact possible to him." It was also codified into the military code of both the American military and the IDF, the Israel Defense Forces. Soldiers are not only allowed to defy illegal orders, they are actually required to do so. The IDF Code of Ethics, the Ruach Tzahal, states, it requires soldiers to defy illegal or immoral orders aligning with international law that obligates service members to refuse commands violating fundamental rights or the Geneva Conventions, making soldiers criminally responsible if they carry out such orders. This principle is rooted in post-Nuremberg standards. It emphasizes that duty ends where illegality begins, meaning soldiers must question potentially unlawful orders and refuse those that are clearly against the law or ethics. There are examples in both countries of soldiers being held accountable for their illegal actions that were performed under order. Bravery is defined not as being afraid to do something scary. Bravery is defined by being afraid and doing it anyway. Defying direct commands from a superior can be terrifying, and yet our obligation is clear. If asked to do something that is illegal or immoral, we are obligated to act morally. May Adonai give us the strength to remember this and the bravery to carry it out. Ken Yehi Ratzon.